Hello everyone, this is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. We've got a presentation today from friend and colleague Lorra Browne. She's with MemorialCare Health System in California, and she'll have some more information about her role and what she does later on in the presentation. We were just chatting a bit about how long we've known each other, and it goes back several years, and Lorra and the team at MemorialCare have done a fine job learning and applying and teaching others. And part of what we're going to do today is Laura's going to be talking about her experiments with leader standard work, a topic of curiosity and interest and a bit of frustration for people as we have been introducing this and people have been experimenting. So I saw some things that Lorra introduced. It was back in earlier this year, and she agreed to host a webinar for us today, so greatly appreciate it. A little bit of housekeeping and ground rules. The phones are on mute now, and we are going to unmute during the Q&A time. If you would like to use the chat function on the webinar, you can certainly do that and list out what questions you might have as we go along. We'll have, as I said, we'll have an unmute time later on. It is being recorded, so you'll have access to the recording that you can share with others and forward to others that weren't able to participate today. A little bit about when I reviewed some of the materials that Lorra put together to kind of put it into context with what I was thinking about, where it fits with some of the things that we talk about at IEX. We talk about key roles in an organization and break it down into 3 levels: leaders, managers, and frontline. And in an ideal situation, you would have leaders spending the brunt of their time looking at the problems of tomorrow, preparing the organization for the future. Some sort of strategy development and strategy deployment system represented here by the triangle. There's also other work that needs to be done, managing daily improvement. Primarily, you would want to see the people at the front line taking a key role in every day improving their work, but also connecting it to the strategic focus and how that works. And the way I think about it is there's this zone in the middle where everyone has standard work. I define it as the agreement about the current best way to do something. And one of the functions of standard work, in particular with leader standard work, is trying to weave together those 2 main systems, strategy development, strategy deployment, with the everyday daily management system that an organization would like to have in place. This is represented again here in this, and I think primarily Lorra's focus might be in this zone right down here, talking about what is the work of leader standard work. It could also blend into manager standard work. We don't make a big distinction there, but anyway, talk about what kinds of things would leaders and managers put in place to have a routine for guiding their work. When we talk about our model for improvement, the sustainability model, we encourage people to think about guiding principles for enterprise excellence. Now, this is a slide that comes from one of our courses previously, and we encourage people to think about what are the principles that would be in place if you had leader standard work, and how would you use those principles to design your system. Lorra and her team are one of the people that have taken a follow-up course from what we do, where we teach people about, so how would you design a better system? And we introduce this idea of a leader standard for a system, looking at what is the purpose of the system, who are the key players in that system, and what are the ideal behaviors you would like to see exhibited, but also what is the outcome of that system that you want to see in place. So that's the output of whatever the system is. Then there's another activity working in the system where you're designing, so what's the process part of that system going to look at? And of course, that's the process. And then there's various inputs. And some of those inputs we describe in these categories. Often people associate the inputs with tools. And so many times, as I've noticed what people are doing, they'll talk about leader standard work, and one of the things they're talking about is a tool that they're using, which is part of it. But I think what Lorra's going to talk about today goes beyond the tools, and she's going to expand it into what are the systems that she's been experimenting with, and also what are those principles that they've been trying to incorporate. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura and let her take control and provide a presentation. We're all going to learn from her. Thanks, Laura.
All right, thank you, Mike, and happy Friday, everyone. What I want to share with you today is my story for developing my basic understanding of applying leader-centered work. First, with the Lean Resource Office, which is an area that I'm accountable to with MemorialCare, and then, provided we have time, a second round of experiments that I did applying leader-centered work using the same leader-centered work system standard, but in a new area I acquired a couple of years ago, which is materials, inventory, and distribution for the health system. So first, I'd just like to say what a privilege it is to be a part of a learning community where we can have a place to come and collaboratively share our experiences, learn from each other, and challenge each other. So what I'm hoping that you all get out of this today are some things that you can think about, butt it up against your learning and see if it resonates, if it validates, or if it challenges your thinking, and then do the same back for me. So with that, let's dive into this topic of leader-centered work. So the hypothesis for the experiment, we went through the effort of doing a hypothesis so that we make sure that we're using the scientific approach. You may think you have a hypothesis in mind, but it's really, really helpful to write it down and keep coming back to it as you build your experiment. So with the results in mind, which for us is year-on-year improvement of operations and leader effectiveness, our hypothesis was built to answer the question, what is the path to take to get to these results? So you can see here what that hypothesis looked like for us as we approach leader-centered work, and more about what's in the what in a moment here. But first, I just want to reiterate that we have really tried to work with and embed the teachings that the Enterprise for Excellence, Enterprise Excellence has taught us through the years of our relationship with them. And so the if in our experiment is if we use this model taught by the Institute of Enterprise Excellence as the vehicle for leveraging the principles of standard work, then we will achieve the results. So there's kind of the premise behind. With that hypothesis in hand, we're ready to start working on the system. What's the first question that folks grapple with when it comes to leader-centered work? In my experience, and as I've talked with folks, the first question is, what is leader-centered work? Is it everything a leader does? Well, if we start to answer that question, it gets very squishy and very broad. If we come at it from the angle, what am I a leader of that I need to have standard work on, then that becomes very self-focused. I think some of the best advice I got was in a session of teaching with Jim Benson, where he really described and laid out, I think, a great purpose, kind of a guiding purpose for what leader-centered work is. Leader-centered work is the leadership responsibility in support of the team that's doing the value-creating work. So for me as a leader of a value-creating work team, now I know how to define my leader-centered work. It's really about knowing what's going on with the team and the operations of the value creation, and caring about the people that are doing that work, that are creating the value. And you can see here a lot of questions. We've talked a lot in the last few years about how questions are so important in our leadership. So a great set of questions, stole all of them from Jim Benson. So with leaders, the leader-centered work defined it becomes apparent what the results of leader standard work need to be. For our organization, what's really important in terms of operational and leader effectiveness is employee engagement, operational dashboards, financial stewardship. And so those are true of the Lean Resource Office as well as everywhere within MemorialCare. So that becomes the results and the KPI we're looking for within our system. So then what principles rule our results? Well, there are many, but to bring some focus to this, as you're writing a system standard, we listened to what was important to our staff. We wanted principles that had a lot of lean and operational excellence theory behind them. And so these three are really what emerged and what we embrace as being the principles for our leader standard work. Create constancy of purpose, lead with integrity, and establish accountability. And these then are the threads that we need to pull through in leader standard work as we work on the system, as we work in the system, as we march out leader standard work, and as we reflect on the end of the experiment on how did the experiment go. So really critical that you understand these and you embrace them and use them as you build out the rest of your system. So as any of you know who have taken the coursework, the next task is to tease out the behaviors that we believe are the ideal behaviors to leverage those principles, which we did. And then, of course, this being leader standard work, a strong pull on those ideal leader behaviors into the work of what we're going to do going forward. So very important, we believe, to document this. This then becomes a tool, but we didn't do the tool without doing all the thinking work behind it. But now what we've done is we've housed, the tool simply houses what is important to us, what our principles are, the desired result. Now we can reference it, we can come back and adjust to include new learning, and we can also use this to coach others in leader standard work. So the next part of working on the system, connect to related or interrelated systems, and also establish that high-level process flow. So you need to get all those behaviors, those ideal behaviors that you want to incorporate into the standard work, built into a model of process flow. So here we're highlighting the other systems to consider and provides for a connection between like processes of the leader standard work. So once you have the high level process flow, then you show how those processes work together within a system of leader standard work. And in this model, you can see that the framework that we used was tiering leader standard work. So various leaders at various tiers, tiering their leader standard work so the connections maintain. What that does then is for us, it especially promotes our three principles. If we can effectively tier leader standard work by various leaders to work together as a system, we're going to create that constancy of purpose. We're going to lead with integrity, and we're going to establish accountability that works. All right, so with we're done working on the system, and so we're ready to actually execute our first experiment and work in the system and see if working in the system gives us that year-on-year improvement, which is the result that we want. So we're starting with the LRO, the Lean Resource Office, and scope is very important here. We did not set out to write and deploy leader standard work for all of MemorialCare. I think that's an important thing to understand here. We were not thinking about this needs to be leader standard work that works everywhere. The experiment was, can we use it in a leaders area of responsibility, which in this case was mine, the Lean Resource Office. So the experiment was designed for the Lean Resource Office, and the next thing then, in order to be able to work in the system, was to plan and to develop leader standard work that is centric to the work context or the business contribution of that value creating work team. So first step is understanding the business. Why do we exist? What does the organization need from us? And out of that should come the vision for your department, for your function, for your team. For us, there's a foundation of lean thinking held by line management, where lean principles were demonstrated daily as a natural way of being and cannot be separated from the fabric of our work. That's the vision, and our role is to help make that happen. So from the onset of lean, from the onset of doing lean transformation at MemorialCare, the purpose of the Lean Resource Office has been really clear for us. We decided long ago that we would be a small team used to build and grow lean capability within the whole management pool, not an army of people that go out and do the manager's job of solving problems in their areas. So very important. Knowing that then tells us what our core competency needs to be. So we as Lean Resource Office, the team, the value they create is not just being able to go out and solve problems. It's really being able to develop that capability inside the management pool. So to make it really crystal clear for our team, we established True North that for us, we just took some role models that resonated with us, and we said, if we are perfect in our core competency, then we would have the capability of developing people to be just like these role models. So that's our business contribution. That's what MemorialCare needs us to do. So next step then is how are we going to do that? How functionally are we going to deliver on that business contribution? And what you see here is those functions boiled down into a framework that works for us. We adopted the 70-20-10 model that's popular in a lot of organizations these days, where 70% is our bread and butter. This is the stuff we do day in, day out. 20% is how we keep making ourselves better at what we do, and the 70% work. And then 10% of our time and focus is reserved just to cultivate a creative spirit of innovation, practicing PDSA, doing experimentation really for experimentation's sake, knowing that there's going to be some pearls that come out of it, but really it's there to just give us the room and the space to really feel what it's like to experiment. And that's been a fun thing for us, and it's really contributed to both our internal capability building and our client work. So having a framework where it breaks it down 70-20-10 really helps us make sure that we're getting the right stuff done in the right amount at the right time, and it all informs the leader standard work. So you know what your business contribution is, you know functionally how you're going to deliver on that contribution. Now it's time to say, and how are we doing with that? So go through a series of functional assessments around what your functional work is, and some of it's data driven, some of it's reflection, some of it's SWOT, some of it's there's a variety of assessment tools you can do to assess your business performance. Do that on all your functions, and then you now have the ability to stand back and say, all right, so what gaps do we need to close? What are the strategic objectives we're going to use in order to close those gaps and get that deployed into a plan that gets it out to the team that's going to execute on the work. For us in the LRO, that translated into a series of program plans, such as lean training programs, our Yokotan shared learning programs, both internal and external, team and individual development goals, et cetera, et cetera. So with those plans then deployed into our X matrix and lined up against our operational metrics for effectiveness on our, so all these things are laying the groundwork for the leader standard work. And without having done all this, it can really be like throwing darts at a dartboard. Now, if you have your plans deployed, the leads of those plans have their trackers and the visual management system tools in place, and we're connecting through a series of huddles and check-ins, leader standard work. This is where I just had to spend a lot of money on a high-tech solution, not really, a page out of my journal. That is where I wrote, this represents 1 full year of my leader routine around all the functional check-ins that I need to make during the year in order to know what's going on and to be able to get things to the people that are doing the value creating work as fast as I can. So for this operational team, a series of huddles and check-ins are really the vehicles of doing the leader standard work. And the leader standard work, as you can see, that process flow includes coaching kata as being a big part of that. So it's really hard to read that small type on the screen, but those blue boxes represent, this is the progression of what we do during those huddles and those check-ins. That's the leader standard work. So armed with that, go ahead and click. It gets plugged into a schedule and march that out through the year. And then for us in the LRO, we've actually done 3 cycles of this with some small tweaks and adjustments. As I go through the year, you'll see some red notations in my notebook. That's simply me tracking the KBI of my leader standard work. So the first year, my KBI was just simply hits and misses. Did it happen? Did it not happen? Second year, which is what you see here, is I added in some notations around when things had to be rescheduled or canceled, as well as misses. So those all help in how well the processes are working behind within the system. So having walked through this for a year, and I now have my information about my KBI, I pull up my results metrics for the department, and I do reflection. Reflection specific to the effectiveness of the leader standard work at the end of the experiment period. So my questions are things like, did we get what we wanted? Did we behave as we said we should? Are we a better team? Are we better serving our mission? Are we delivering on our business contribution? So that's some time. It involves some conversations with others, and we're really setting up for, again, for the next year. And then also what I do, if you could click to the next slide, is because this is leader standard work for myself, I do, I think some deeper personal reflection and ask myself questions like, did this work well for me? Did I work this well? What did I learn? And what am I now more curious about that I wasn't curious about before? So let me just pause for a second there because I can now share the next set of experiments, which was in a new area of responsibility. But Mike, is there any clarification for you or the listeners before I go to the second experiment?
I'm going to go to the chat function and see if there's some questions here. There was a question about the small group details and how that came about.
So this was actually a tool that our consulting firm that got us started on our lean journey helped our leaders sort through what model they wanted to set up for the support of lean transformation at MemorialCare. So some organizations like Virginia Mason have established very large lean resource office or improvement offices. Others have kept it small and focused, as you see here. And what this tool does is it helps you sort out what is it that you're hoping to accomplish in the establishment of that support team. Does that help?
There was a follow-up question. Is this team dedicated to helping teams?
Yes. So our main mission is to embed capability in the management pool. So what that looks like in our client work is we will facilitate workshops. We will coach others as they facilitate A3 improvement works or focused improvement workshops. We have really invested in a group of certified lean leaders. So close to 1% of our organization is certified lean leaders, where in the Lean Resource Office, we call that panel of lean consultants fellows. There's 10 of us for the organization that is 12,000 deep employee-wise, and we have approaching 200 certified lean leaders among the management ranks. So more and more we invest in the CLLs, the certified lean leaders, and the management pool as they invest in their teams. And partnering with them all along the way, we get involved in harder and harder problem-solving workshops, as you might imagine, as the management team gets better and better at doing the smaller scale stuff.
Okay, great.
There was a new opportunity to pull out the Leader Standard Work System standard, and I'm trying to advance. There it goes. Our materials department, which is inventory and distribution. So if you think of the receiving dock to point of use, material flow became my responsibility. So my question immediately was, will the same hypothesis apply in this new area I've got? A couple differences to note. The LRO is a small team of management level knowledge workers, but the materials team now is much more tactile. The team is large and geographically dispersed across 2 counties of Southern California, and the teams that historically have not been accustomed to big organizational thinking. So I was just the second centralized operational leader for these guys, and so they hadn't come very far along with becoming customized in their thinking about their business contribution. So those are just some considerations I need to keep in mind as I reach for my hypothesis and design my next experiment. So once again, an understanding of the business is needed in the planning stage. And so asking the same questions: why do we exist? What does the organization need from us? What does success look like for us? How is the work done functionally? So you can see kind of a functional map with the metrics of success that are applied there, all of which is informed by what MemorialCare needs from this work team. So understanding the functions then gives us the ability to assess the functions and the effectiveness of each of those functions. And we've recognized here that we needed to be as intentional about team development as about the actual functions that they're performing. In other words, again, that recognition that the team is the value creator. So you really got to make sure that your business plan for improvement includes how are you developing this. So after performance gaps are identified, then we pick the ones that will close the gap for us first. And my advancer's not working again, Mike. There they go. And so then it's determining what are those important levers on our strategy to deliver. So once you know your strategy and you're getting it deployed, what we noticed in this model is that we really needed to deploy it through multiple tiers. So where in the LRO it was just kind of tearing down, but here I have many direct reports that are all tearing down from themselves. So really understanding what is the deployment look like from a tiering perspective, and then two, for this operational department, what that tiered accountability, what that tiering effect really centered less around work plans and more around actual operational metrics and daily processes that feed those metrics, et cetera, et cetera. So this became more a series of biweekly or even daily huddles with metric boards that are rolling up to each other. So a little more work in the tooling of this, organizing, synchronizing, and calendaring this standard work. Being careful to keep the principles at the forefront. We're making sure we coach this through the tiers, careful to use best practices for coaching kata. And then here where we've got a multi-tiered leadership infrastructure, really closely tied to our response and escalation systems. Okay, next slide. And getting it scheduled, marching out the year, tracking the leader KPIs for the leader standard work. And then next slide. Again, we're at the end of this experiment cycle. 1 year, this was a 1 year cycle in the materials department as well. And so then we did reflection and analysis, evaluated the effectiveness of the leader standard work against, did our operational metrics improve, did our team improve, and again, through multiple layers. So there's opportunities at different locations, different systems, but really that interrelatedness and the interdependence of our leader standard work practices really comes through here when we stop and analyze it, which lends to some really great opportunities for the next cycle of improvement for leader centered work in this department. So next slide. I hope by sharing my story, really our story, that something has resonated with you, validated some things for you. You found some ways that maybe you can challenge us and how we can take our leader-centered work to the next level. And then last slide. I would really encourage and challenge others that are working with leader-centered work to consider this kind of basic framework to building your practice of leader-centered work. We can't bypass, if we really want to take a principle-based approach, we really need to understand the nature of the business and what the definition of leader-centered work is. So I think as we work on this together, it's really going to help us together to prove or disprove the fundamental theory of the leader-centered work system, which is what the experimentation is all about.
Great. I'm going to unmute the phones, and anyone who's on the call that would like to ask a question could do so. And you can still use the chat function if you'd like. So I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions for Laura.
Hey, Laura, how big of an organization are you?
MemorialCare is has 13,000 employees. We have like five hospitals, dozens of medical offices, some ambulatory imaging centers, surgery centers, with a healthcare plan. So the scope of the organization is very large.
Would you have any recommendations, any insight on doing this with a much, much smaller organization?
I think I would go back to scoping, really understand the scoping of where you're going to apply. So as you're building a leader standard work system, there's some scoping there, and there's some scoping around the individual leader. So I think leaders, as they apply leader standard work, need to work within the scope, really understand what their business contribution is of their work team, and build their leader standard work in support of that. But the system standard provides opportunity as a larger and larger chunk of your organization is ready to embrace similar principles, similar results, expectations, etc., to expand it across the board. I know that some have chosen to start with a leader standard work system for all, and then trickled it out that way. This is more of a grassroots kind of experiment where we started with a single leader and built a system that works, experimented with it, shared, and then see where we can apply it in other places.
So that kind of leads into a good segue for the last question I had, and how do you get buy-in from senior leaders for this?
That's an excellent question, and I'll tell you, we've got a mishmash right now. We have other leaders in the organization, some sitting in pay grades higher than mine that are experimenting with leader standard work. We've also got a couple of leaders sitting in pay grades, a couple pay grades higher than mine, that are not entirely sold on, I'll just say, the readiness of our organization to embrace leader-centered work across the board. So it's still evolving organically.
Well, it sounds like you're still working through that, but do you have a defined method or defined approach to senior leaders to really, walk through an engagement strategy to get them on board?
Excellent question. So for lean transformation, we have a lean steering team, which is comprised of the COOs and a few of our shared services leaders, of our MHS leaders that sit on it. So we have those conversations. So we've gone through the same thing with visual management systems, with our system Apply Best for workplace excellence, for problem-solving methodology. So this is another layer that leaders on that are the lean steering team for this work. Okay. Well, I'm hoping that I answered the gentleman's question. I think his question was, what is the strategy the organization is using to take it more broadly across everywhere? And right now, the strategy is continue to let it grow organically, to monitor it, to guide it, we believe we're still probably a few years out from having it be the same everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's been the observations that we've had as well, is it's very hard to make someone do anything they really don't want to do. And I like your advice in the middle of this slide. Keep it principle-based, keep it simple, experimentation. I think people taking the lead and demonstrating how this actually helps the organization. People are interested in getting results, but if you can demonstrate that you can get results because you've built in a way to get the ideal behaviors that delivers those ideal results, some people will follow.
Yeah, if you don't make the connection between the actions you're taking and what needle is going to move, then you have no basis to say it worked or it didn't work. So getting really clear on what is leader-centered work, so that you can say, okay, this is how we would measure that. Whether both are we doing it and is it doing what we want it to do?
Right, right. Okay. I've kept the phones on mute because there was background noise, but you can use the chat function to ask questions. So if there's any other questions or observations. Well, Lorra, again, thank you for taking the time to do this. I learned a lot today, and I'm thrilled that you took the time to work on this and to share your learnings with us. I thought it was terrific. A little bit about next steps as far as this method for learning. In October, some leaders and clinicians from Hennepin County Medical Center are going to talk about some of their experiences with applying methodology for sustainable improvements in the reduction of catheter-associated urinary tract infections and what they've learned. And a lot of this does also include standard work and leader and manager standard work. So there's a carry-on over there. If you want to learn more about it, there's some details on the bit.ly link on the left. There's a short summary video on the bit.ly link on the right. And when you get the recording for this presentation, you could relook at those bit.ly links as well. In November, I'm going to do a summary of the most recent white paper that we have developed called Side-by-Side Management. And we'll be doing a presentation on that just to kind of unpackage that a little bit more. In December, friend and colleague Dan Markovitz is going to share his thoughts on what he calls the FIT organization. Many times I point people in Dan's direction when they talk about ways to organize their schedule. He's done some great work on personal Kanban and some other concepts in his book, Factory of One. He's got a new book, and he's going to be talking about some of those concepts, just carrying on in the thinking. So that'll be in December. If anyone on the call has any topics they would like to share or requests for topics to share in the area of leader standard work, I do have another presentation coming up in early 2018. Friend and colleague Kevin McNamara has agreed to do a presentation on his application of leader standard work, so we'll see some additional experimentation there. So again, I want to thank Lorra and her team for taking the time to put this together, and hopefully it was a good trial for you, Lorra, as far as packaging the material and sharing. And again, I appreciate your time today and hope everyone has a good day. Thanks everyone for your time.